Well, folks, gather around because it seems our favorite reality show, International Trade is Bonkers, just got renewed for another nail-biting episode. Just last month on May 23, 2025, President Trump unveiled his latest blockbuster policy, a potential 25% tariff on smartphones, with a special, almost laser-focused side-eye towards Apple. The ultimatum was clear: make your iPhones in the good old US of A, or face the tariff music, starting June 1st. So, are we all paying more for our glowing rectangles of distraction yet? The air is thick with suspense. This isn't just about iPhones. There was also a casual threat of a 50% tax on all imports from the European Union. Now, this isn't Apple's first rodeo with the tariff bull, but a 25% tariff specifically dangled like a sword of Damocles over their flagship product? That's a new level of spicy. The implications are enormous, not just for Apple's bottom line, but for the tech industry, for consumers, and for the already strained relationship between the US and, well, most of the places that make things. What's the big idea behind this America First, your iPhone Second policy? President Trump wants Apple to manufacture iPhones domestically. He told Tim Cook that iPhones sold in the US should be made in the US to avoid tariffs. The goal is to bring manufacturing jobs back to America and reduce reliance on Chinese manufacturing. Trump's trade policies often involve tariffs and skepticism of multilateral agreements. Remember the 20% tariff on Chinese imports linked to the US fentanyl crisis? The global supply chain is complex and interwoven, built over decades. Trump's approach often overlooks this intricate reality. The idea is to make imports expensive, so companies build factories in America. Economists warn that shock therapy can worsen the situation, especially in a globalized economy reliant on efficiency and specialized hubs. The patriotic soundbite, "Make iPhones American," rings alarm bells for those who understand manufacturing logistics. Now let's talk about where your beloved Apple gadgets actually come from. For years, the heart of Apple's manufacturing universe has been China, specifically vast factory complexes like those run by Foxconn in places such as Shenzhen. China offered an unparalleled combination of skilled labor, a massive, adaptable workforce, and a deeply integrated supply chain for electronics components. But here's where it gets interesting. Even before this latest tariff kerfuffle, Apple, under the shrewd leadership of Tim Cook, had already started to explore other options. Why? Rising labor costs in China were one factor, but the increasingly volatile US-China trade relationship added a sense of urgency. So, where has Apple been looking? Two names pop up consistently: India and Vietnam. India is increasingly becoming a hub for iPhone assembly. Tim Cook himself stated that most iPhones sold in the US during the current fiscal quarter would actually come from India. That's a pretty big deal. We're talking about 10 to 15% of global iPhone assembly already happening there, and that number is only expected to grow. And then there's Vietnam. While perhaps not yet assembling as many iPhones as India, Vietnam has become a crucial player for other Apple products. Think Apple Watches. A staggering 90% of their production happens in Vietnam. This isn't just about finding cheaper labor, it's about building resilience, creating alternative supply chains that can absorb shocks. It's a global chess game, and Apple has been carefully moving its pieces for a while now. Okay, let's indulge the fantasy for a moment. What if President Trump got his wish? What if Apple moved its entire manufacturing to the United States? Imagine iPhone, designed by Apple in California, assembled in Alabama. Hold on to your wallets because that patriotic glow would come with a hefty price tag. Analysts suggest the price could skyrocket to between $1,500 and $3,500. Yes, you heard that right. $3,500 for a phone. The investment required would be astronomical. So, while the idea of American-made iPhones might play well in a political speech, the economic reality is sobering. Section 5, Tim Cook's tightrope walk: diplomacy, diversification, and dodging tariffs. In the face of these recurring tariff tempests, Apple CEO Tim Cook has cultivated a very particular style of leadership. It's less bombastic declaration, more quiet diplomacy, and meticulously planned strategic maneuvers. While President Trump was making his May 23rd pronouncements, Cook was, characteristically, not engaging in a public war of words. Instead, he's known for a more direct, behind-the-scenes approach. He's met with Trump on multiple occasions, including a recent White House meeting, the details of which remain largely under wraps. This isn't to say Cook is a pushover, far from it. His strategy appears to be a sophisticated blend of engagement and insulation. He'll talk, he'll listen, he'll probably present Apple's case with a mountain of data, but simultaneously the company is beavering away, making itself less vulnerable to any single point of political or economic pressure. This is where the clever comeback part of our story really begins to take shape. It's the steady, relentless diversification of Apple's manufacturing footprint. Section 6. The Great Apple Migration. India and Vietnam roll out the welcome mat and assembly lines. Let's zoom in on this great Apple migration because it's really at the heart of how Tim Cook is outmaneuvering these tariff threats. It's not a sudden panic-induced dash for the exits from China. Rather, it's a carefully orchestrated expansion into new territories, primarily India and Vietnam. These countries are increasingly eager to welcome high-tech manufacturing, seeing it as a pathway to economic growth and job creation. And Apple, with its colossal production needs, is a very attractive partner. India, with its massive population and growing domestic market, is a particularly significant part of this strategy. As mentioned, Tim Cook himself confirmed that a majority of iPhones sold in the US this past quarter were assembled in India. This is a remarkable shift. We're already seeing between 10% and 15% of total iPhone assembly happening in India, and this figure is projected to climb. Then there's Vietnam, which has quietly become an absolute powerhouse for Apple's wearables and other devices. An astonishing 90% of Apple Watch production now takes place in Vietnam. For Apple, Vietnam represents another crucial node in its increasingly diversified global supply network, reducing its historic over-reliance on China. Section 7. The Tariff Shell Game. Who's bluffing whom in this high-stakes poker match? Now we arrive at the million-dollar question. Was President Trump's 25% tariff threat on Apple a genuine ironclad policy, or was it a high-stakes bluff? Mary Lovely from the Peterson Institute for International Economics suggested that these kinds of tariffs are often negotiating ploys, but she also warned that they portray the U.S. as an unreliable trading partner. Trump has a history of making bold pronouncements and then, sometimes, walking them back or granting exemptions. This constant back and forth makes it incredibly difficult for businesses to plan long-term. The bluff theory gains some traction when you consider the sheer impracticality of Apple immediately shifting all its production to the U.S. The costs would be astronomical, the disruption immense. Did Trump really expect Apple to just snap its fingers and conjure up a dozen U.S. iPhone megafactories by June 1st? Or was the threat designed to push Apple further in a direction it was already heading, diversifying away from China? It's hard to say definitively, but it certainly feels like a move from a well-worn playbook. Section 8, Cookmate, how Apple played the long game and left Trump fuming, figuratively we hope. So, how did President Trump's big tariff gambit on Apple ultimately play out? Did it force iPhones to be stamped made in Montana overnight? Well, not exactly. In fact, one could argue quite persuasively that this particular tariff threat backfired. And the reason for this can be summed up in two words: Tim Cook. Or more accurately, Tim Cook's long-term, quiet, and remarkably clever strategic planning. He didn't need a dramatic last-minute comeback because, in many ways, Apple had already made its move. The backfire isn't that Trump immediately rescinded the threat. Instead, it's that Apple, through its years-long diversification into India and Vietnam, had already significantly insulated itself. When Trump declared that iPhones for the U.S. market should be made in the U.S. or face a 25% tariff, Apple could point to the fact that a growing majority of its U.S.-bound iPhones were already coming from India. This proactive diversification is the essence of Cook's clever comeback. By the time the May 23rd threat arrived, Apple wasn't caught flat-footed. They had options. They had leverage. They had already demonstrated a commitment to building resilient, geographically diverse supply chains.